I don't know if anyone's told you this lately, but you're special. Did you know that? And the reason I say that is because Jesus Christ went to the cross for you. Wow. Every one of you special to the Lord, that he would give up his life for you. And today we've come to worship him. In fact, today is Communion Sunday when we remember what Jesus Christ did for us on the cross. Well, in 1984, one of my favorite movies came out. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. I just want you to guess what it is based on something I do. Okay, let's see. You ready? Here it is. The Karate Kid. Is there any fans here? Anyone? Good. This is a good group. I like you guys. So it's the story of a young man named Daniel. He's about 16 years old. And him and his mom moved from New Jersey to California. And he's the new kid on the block. And within no time, he starts being bullied by a group of karate students named the Cobra Kai. And their teacher teaches them the philosophy of no mercy. Strike first, strike hard. And they really use their karate skills to bully others. And Daniel's getting bullied, and finally he's just kind of at the end of his rope. And a man comes into his life, a father figure, to mentor him, and his name is what? Mr. Miyagi. Yes, one of the quotes that I love in the movie is Mr. Miyagi says to Daniel, there are no bad students, just bad teachers. And that teacher is teaching him, again, to use his karate skills, the other pupils of Cobra Kai, to intimidate people and to bully them. Well, Daniel asks him, Mr. Miyagi, would you mentor me in karate? And Mr. Miyagi says, yeah, and he does it in an unconventional way. Remember that? He has him wax the car and paint the fence and all of those things. And Daniel doesn't understand what's going on. And he's like, you know what? You're just using me to do your chores. But what he doesn't realize is that Miyagi was using the chores to teach him karate. He was using the chores for a higher purpose. And at one moment, again, Daniel just kind of didn't understand, and he starts complaining to Miyagi. And Miyagi says, paint the fence. And he paints the fence, and as he does it, he blocks Miyagi's punch. Or he tells them to wax on, wax off, and he blocks one of his kicks. And it's at that moment that Daniel realizes, he connects the dots. Wait a minute. I wasn't just doing chores. Miyagi was teaching me karate. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever been in a moment in your life when it's like, Lord, why are you having me jump through all these hoops? Lord, why is one thing going wrong after another? You say, well, Lord, I became a follower of yours, and maybe you thought, well, you'd be just seeing miracles and things would be exciting, but they're just kind of going along. And you're like, Lord, where is that excitement in following you? Or maybe you got married with high expectations and it hasn't lived up to the expectations, and you and your spouse are drifting apart, and you're like, Lord, what's going on? What do you do when the happenings of your life don't make sense to you and you don't see how they fit within the bigger picture? Well, today I'm going to share with you a very precious Bible verse. It's one of the most precious Bible verses to me in the whole Bible, and it's Jeremiah 18:6, which says this, can I not, O house of Israel, deal with you as the potter does? Declares the Lord, behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O Israel. God says, think about a piece of clay. Now I'm going to mold something right now and see if you guys can get it. I'm actually pretty good at this. All right, so what do you think that is? A pancake. Okay, what else? What? Cookie. Okay, what else? A plate. Okay, it's none of those. It's the Rocky Mountains. Don't you see it? Some people have problems. All right, but notice how I'm molding it and I'm shaping it. Now get this. God says you and I are like this in his hands. That he's molding us and that he's shaping us. And what that teaches me is that often what is happening around us, God is using to do something within us. Often what's happening around us, God is using it to do something within us. I remember one time being in a prayer session with the Lord, and I sensed he said to me, Steve, you're focused on outer fruit, but you need to also be focused on inner fruit. In other words, I was focused on growing the church and making a difference in our community. And it was like he said to me, Steve, but you don't realize I'm not just focused on the outer fruit, I'm focused on the inner fruit. I'm forming you, I'm shaping you. There's not much fruit of the Spirit right now. So remember that I'm not just shaping this out here, I'm shaping your spirit within you. And some of you are out there and you're like, well, I don't see much purpose in my life right now. Things are not going good. They're falling apart. What's going on, Lord? And I think this is what he would say to you. Like clay in the hands of the potter, I am shaping you through these difficult times. Through these times that you don't understand. You're like, what's going on? I have no idea. God's like, I know what I'm doing. I'm molding you and I'm shaping you into a great mountain. So, what do you do when you're going through a time and you really have no understanding? You're like, Lord, what's going on? Things are falling apart. No, God is using that time to mold you and to shape you. See, difficult times are not wasted times if you realize that God is molding you and shaping you. Useless times can be useful times if you realize that God is molding you and shaping you. Like clay in the hands of the potter, God is molding you and shaping you for something in the future. I remember reading a book on leadership. It was called The Making of a Leader, and it said that imagine that your life is a big book. There's chapter 1, 2, 3, all these chapters. And often what God does is he allows something maybe in chapter 2, a very difficult time, and that event is processing you for something maybe in chapter 13. He's shaping you and molding you for the future. And that's why when we're in those difficult times, it's just surrendering to the Lord and saying, Lord, I surrender. I don't know why this is happening. I don't understand it. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. But I don't know that this would feel good. I don't know. I've never been Plato, but I'm not sure that this would feel good. And often when God is molding us and shaping us, it doesn't feel good. But he's doing something that you need to just trust in. So you say, Lord, I don't trust, I don't understand, but I choose to trust you. So growing up in church, we used to sing this song, have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will, while I'm waited, yielded, and still. Have you put yourself in the Lord's hands? If you're a Christian, you have. And you have to understand that he's more interested in your character than your comfort. He wants you to grow into the image of his Son. And to do that, you're going to have to go through some of the things Jesus went through. Was Jesus ever betrayed? He was killed on a cross. Was Jesus ever lonely? Yeah. God is more interested in forming your character than encouraging your comfort. Like clay in the hands of the potter, we are in God's hands. You say, well, what does this have to do with the Red Sea? Well, the Israelites are caught between the Red Sea and the ruthless killers of Pharaoh's army. God delivers them. He parts the Red Sea. They walk through on dry ground. And then notice what happens next. Exodus 14:30 through 31. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, watch this, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. You see that? During the event, during this pivotal circumstance in Israel's life, the people doubted and they went through difficulties. But at the end, God was molding them and shaping them, and their faith had grown. The people feared the Lord and put their trust in him. In other words, during that difficult situation, God was molding them and shaping them. Like clay in the hands of the potter, we are in God's hands. Now, guys, this is so important. This is so important to get the things we've been teaching during this series. Some of you, you're on easy street right now. Everything's going great. Jesus said in this life you're going to have trials. You say, Steve, stop being negative. No, I'm just saying what the Bible teaches. I don't know where we get it from, but I used to think, well, now that I'm a Christian, nothing bad's going to happen to me. No, bad things still happen, but you have someone new to go through it with you, and that is Christ. But you need to understand this concept that God is more interested in molding you and shaping you. And He's not, when you go through a difficult time, He doesn't comfort you to be He doesn't comfort you to be comfortable. He comforts you to be a comforter, right? Some of you, He's like, why am I going through a situation? I'll tell you, God is equipping you to someday be able to say those magic words to someone else. I've been there. He wants to make you into a wounded healer. It's so important. Why? Because this perspective helps us to see purpose in our pain. Now, as human beings, we need purpose. In fact, I heard about this guy who was paid really big money to dig holes. So he'd go out in the morning and he would dig a hole, and then he'd fill it back in. And then he'd dig a hole and fill it back in. And he made great money, but he quit within a week. Why? There was no purpose in his job, right? And as human beings, we need purpose. And you're going through a difficult time and you're like, what's the purpose? I'll tell you the purpose. God is molding you and shaping you into His image. You say, Steve, I don't feel that. I don't believe that. That doesn't matter. God said it. I believe it. That settles it. God's word is truth. You may not feel it. Don't live by feelings. Live by faith. God said it. He's up to something good in my life. Some of you are like going through a difficult time and you're going to leave here saying, wow, God is up to something good in my life. Heard about this pastor that whenever he was going through a difficult time, he'd take his wife out for lunch and celebrate. Why? God is up to something good in my life. 2 Corinthians says, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we're wasting away, inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. God says that difficult time you're going through, that momentary trouble, is doing something in the eternal realm. You don't see it. You can't feel it. But that's what's happening. We just need to trust Him. And I'm not saying this is easy. Believe me, I'm not saying it's easy. Some of us maybe today just need to pray the prayer, Lord, help me to trust You. Just help me to understand that You're doing something good in my life, even during this difficult time. I think if you have this perspective that God is molding you and shaping you, secondly, it'll help us not give up. A lot of people are struggling with not giving up. Think about how many suicides there have been in this pandemic. And do you know what Satan likes to do? He likes to say you might as well quit. Run. Escape. But if you know your why, that God is molding me and shaping me, it'll help you to keep on keeping on. In the 1990s, there was a fight between Mike Tyson and James Buster Douglas. Now, Mike Tyson was the champ, and man, could he hit. And the odds were 42-1 that he would win. In other words, James Buster Douglas, if they would have fought 42 times, the odds were that Douglas would have won maybe once. Not very good odds of winning. Yet James Buster Douglas won that fight. And they asked him why. Well, a few weeks before the fight, his mother died. And he said, I'm fighting this fight in the memory of my mother. And right after the fight, you could see him looking up and saying, Mom, that was for you. In other words, he had a higher reason for fighting. And that's what I'm saying is when you're going through a difficult time, the higher reason is that God is molding me and shaping me. I don't know how, but I know that's the truth because that's what the Bible says. James says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Why? Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. An easy life is a comfortable life. But if it's all easy, there's no maturity. With difficulties and trials, that verse says, God says, I'm building you. I'm building your faith. I'm building your maturity. I'm building the virtue within you. I think another reason why it's important to remember this perspective that God is molding us and shaping us is number 3, it reminds me of what we're in control of. I love this verse. Whatever happens, my dear brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. Whatever happens. Now, can I remind you that most of whatever happens is out of your control? Right? Most of what happens is out of your control. Spiritual growth is surrendering what you can't control to God. But what can you control? Your attitude. Notice it says, whatever happens, rejoice in the Lord. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control, not others' control. Stop trying to control others. Focus on yourself. Does that make sense? That's spiritual growth. If some of us would stop doing that, trying to change and control others, man, we'd find so much freedom. I mean, it's hard enough to control yourself, right? The other night, last night I was at some people's house having supper, and I said I wasn't going to have any dessert. Well, I had 2 things of dessert. I mean, what, right? It's hard enough to control yourself. Why are we trying to control and change others? And what you control is your attitude and your choice. In other words, imagine if our attitude was, whatever happens today, I'm going to rejoice. Wow, that's power. Chuck Swindoll says, the longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than the facts. It's more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstance, than failures, than successes, than what others think or say or do. It's more important than the appearance, giftedness, or skill. It'll make or break a company, a church, a home. And the remarkable thing is that we have a choice every day regarding the attitude we'll embrace for that day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I'm convinced that life is 10% what happens and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We're in charge of our attitude. So when God is molding you and shaping you, you can choose to get bitter or you can choose to get better. You can cooperate with his molding, or you can try to jump out of his hands. You ever tried to do that? I'm going to just try to jump out of the potter's hands. This is kind of uncomfortable. Or you can say, God, you're up to something good. You're teaching me, you're training me, you're molding me for the future. Like clay in the hands of the potter, you and I are in God's hands. And he's molding us and he's shaping us. Now, here's another way to think of it. Do any of you like math? Raise your hand. Is there any math people in here? Okay, a few. So I don't like math, and in college I took this class called college algebra, and I remember studying, and it, like at a point my brain would hurt. Do you guys remember those days? And it was just like, oh, but one of the things I learned is that algebra comes before calculus or any advanced math. Okay, you guys aware of that? Algebra comes before calculus. You have to learn algebra to be able to go to the next level of calculus. Now, imagine if we had an algebra before calculus mindset towards our problems. You say, what does that mean? Well, what if you're going through a very difficult season right now? It's stressing you out. You're not sleeping well. It's a very difficult time. What if that's your algebra? You say, what does that mean? Well, what if that season is preparing you for calculus spiritually? What if you have to go through this to get ready for that? Now, let me share with you an example I've shared before. I do this for a couple of reasons. One is I'm trying to constantly make our church aware we're a safe place for mental illness. Okay? But that's why I tell this story often. But you hear about, in 2002, I went through a severe depression. Best way I can explain it is that I felt like the candle had been blown out. There was no life within me. My wife saw that I was not interested in the things that I normally am, like reading, and she's like, Steve, you need to go get some help. So I went there, and they told me I was severely depressed, and I was. I remember feeling like I was trapped in a sunless garden where the flowers were all dead. Getting out of bed in the morning was a chore. Well, by the grace of God, I made it through that season, and I learned a lot. I mean, I learned a lot of things that have helped me in the past 20 years. Well, to be transparent with you, 2020, when the pandemic hit, that was difficult for me. At first, I was kind of almost obsessive compulsive in washing my hands. And I also was afraid of what if a loved one gets the virus, and I was afraid, what impact is this going to have in the country? Well, because of what I went through in 2002, I was able to make it through that season. In fact, the Lord gave us a vision to do a series in summer called Stigma Free at CCC, and we just wanted to go through our belief that there's no stigma around mental illness. And then last fall, I was called to speak to pastors around the state on mental illness. So I did that in the fall, and then they asked me to speak to newly credentialed pastors this winter. And then at that event, a district official came up to me and said, would you speak at our women's conference next fall? Now, what I wanted you to see is, you see how God is using me to help others with mental illness? That's my calculus. But I would have never been able to do that if I didn't go through Algebra in 2002. Do you see the connection? And you say, Steve, I'm going through this difficult time. Well, is it possible in 20 years you're going to help this person with that? Some of you have been through a divorce. Who can help someone who's been through a divorce? Someone who's been there. Some of you have lost a child. Who can best help someone who's lost a child? Someone who's lost a child. And that's what I'm trying to help you to understand and help me to understand, is that sometimes we go through these algebra courses. We're like, why? What's that? Well, God's going to use it downstream. So remember that. God comforts us not to be comfortable, but that we can be a comforter to others. And just as a side note, if you're wrestling with mental illness, maybe you're watching online and you're wrestling with mental illness, but you don't feel it's safe to admit it. And I just want to say, this is a safe place to admit it. It's okay to be able to say, I'm not okay. All right? Seek help. Don't suffer in silence. Reach out. Talk to me. Talk to someone at our church. This is a safe place to wrestle with mental illness as well as any other illness. J. Hudson Taylor says, I know God tries me only to increase my faith. So in closing, I just want to talk to you about 5 ways that God molds us and shapes us. You may want to write this down. This is some good stuff on how God molds us and shapes us, and I want to give credit to Pastor Anley Stanley, who taught me this. Number 1, through practical teaching. In other words, just by coming today and hearing someone teach the Bible, the power is not in the person, the power is in the person teaching the Bible. You see the difference? The power is in the Bible. And God's molding you and shaping you. In Romans 10:17, it says, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. Number 2, private disciplines. Now, let me tell you something. You cannot spiritually grow yourself. You can't say, Steve, grow. You can't do that, just like you can't say to a plant, grow. Now, I have a power to kill plants, but I don't have the power to cause them to grow. So we can't do that. But what we can do is use the tools that God has given us to grow our spirit. For example, the Bible. You read the Bible, God grows our soul through that. Prayer, worship service, process groups, services. That's why on March 17th, I'm doing that 4-week series on just how to use the tools of spiritual growth. How to really get into the Bible, how to pray. Those sort of things. Another thing is personal ministry. Now, let me ask you a question. How does a person get in shape? You have no clue. So let me tell you. Nutrition and exercise. Both of them are important. And it's the same thing when it comes to spiritual growth. How do we grow? Nutrition and exercise. Now, in our culture, we're really focused on nutrition. People say, I need to be fed, and I need to sit and receive. And yes, you do. But you also need to serve. We also need to exercise our faith. Last Sunday, I went out in the gathering grounds, and there was a young lady that I always see at Subway. Subway's like one of my favorite restaurants. And, it's just such a great place to bring my wife on our anniversary. I mean, it's just got the right feel. But no, I love Subway. And she was here, and I talked to her. And what I found out, she was with about 5 or 6 other young teens. What I found out was one of the teens had invited all of her friends to come. And I talked to that teen, and she said, yeah, now I'm going to try to get more to come. It just really blessed me. Here was a teenager making a difference for Christ. She was doing her ministry. Here's another thing, providential relationships. In other words, someone God brings into your life providentially to teach you something, to mold you, to shape you. I had dinner with a guy last night, and he was telling me how the Lord brought someone into his life for like a year, and God just transformed his life through him. That's what Miyagi was to Daniel. Now, I know this is just a movie, but he was a providential relationship, and sometimes God will just providentially bring someone into your life to grow you. And do you know, sometimes I think the people who've helped me to grow the most are those who have taught me what not to do. You ever thought of that? You can just watch their example, or they've done something to you, and it's like, oh, that's a great lesson of what not to do. Here's another thing, pivotal circumstances. This is what we've been studying for the last 9 weeks, is the Israelites going through a pivotal circumstance. Afterwards, their faith was emboldened and their fear of God. And sometimes God allows pivotal circumstances to mold you and shape you. What have we learned today? As you think about the movie The Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi was molding and shaping Daniel. That's what Christ is to you, is he's molding you and he's shaping you. Our job is to stay moldable, to stay available, to trust him. In closing, I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes. Back in my Algebra season of 2002, this quote was so precious to me. I read it over and over. Let me read it to you. For he, God, brought me here. It is in his will that I'm in this place. In that fact, I will rest. Next, he'll keep me here in his love and give me grace to behave as his child. Then he will make this trial into a blessing, teaching me the lessons he intends for me to learn and working in me the grace he means to bestow. Last, in his good time, he can bring me out again. How and when, he knows. Let me say I'm here, by God's appointment, in his keeping, under his training, and for his time. Would you pray with me? Lord, have thine own way. Have thine own way. You are the potter. We are the clay. Lord, I pray that you would help us today. Help anyone that's just going through a real difficult time, or maybe they're going through a boring time in their life. God, help us to trust that you're molding us and you're shaping us. Lord, I pray for that person today that's just barely getting by. Maybe they're ready to give up. Would you just breathe into them today faith and hope that this chapter might be extremely difficult, but you are molding them and you are preparing them for a future chapter. Oh God, we just surrender to your shaping process, your molding process. Help us to just rejoice in you. Help us to believe in you and trust in advance what will make sense in reverse. We just let go. We put ourselves in your hands, Papa, Daddy. Mold us, shape us. When the days are long and the nights are difficult, may we just remember you, that you are molding us. And it is for our good. You are doing something eternal in our soul, and we choose to trust you. Like clay in the hands of the divine potter, you and I, as followers of Jesus, are being shaped and molded into the image of Christ. Because there's only one life, it'll soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. We love you, Lord. We ask this in your name. And everyone said, Amen.